If you've ever been racked with self-doubt, if you've ever found yourself discounting your accomplishments or feeling undeserving of a position that you hold, if you've ever felt like a fraud, an imposter who has masterfully duped the world and then had to live with that strong and persistent fear of being found out, then you know how disempowering and debilitating it can be to be challenged by this thing that many call imposter syndrome. I can think of times in my previous career where this was exactly my challenge, and it led to periods of deep anxiety and chronic overwork. It led to me playing small, holding back ideas and opinions, and it led to self-doubt, self-criticism, unhelpful comparison with others. And if you shared this with any of my colleagues at the time, they just have no idea. But I can tell you, on the inside, it was a really difficult time for me. Now, back then, when I went into the literature looking for a solution, I found a ton written on the subject. And to an extent, it was somewhat helpful to understand more about what was really going on, to know it's common and that we're not alone in this, and to know it's largely a natural response. But so far as solutions go, the literature comes up short. Listing out your achievements won't do it. Getting clear on strengths, focusing just on the facts, hearing from others you've nothing to worry about, positive affirmations into the mirror, these tactics just won't do it. Because imposter syndrome is driven by beliefs that are designed to meet powerful and deeply rooted unmet needs. The need not to feel undeserving, the need not to have to prove oneself, the need not to be excluded. And like all self-sabotage, there's an internal conflict happening here between a conscious desire and those non-conscious needs, wanting to progress, wanting to succeed versus not having to prove oneself, not risking exclusion. And so those surface level tactics, listing achievements, getting clear on your strengths, they're great, but they just won't be strong enough to overcome the oftentimes overwhelming sense of impostorism. So if this is something that you're struggling with currently, or something you've struggled with in the past and fear may reoccur, there are 3 pieces of work I want to suggest, because no one should have to move through professional life with this issue hanging over them. And I'm calling it work, not because it's effortful or complicated. You can definitely do this and do it quickly, but because this is more than tips, tricks, and hacks. This is work of a deeper nature. So let me give you the list, and then let's look at each in turn, and I'd love you just to grab whatever's useful, discard the rest. So we're going to do 3 things today. We're going to detach from the beliefs that are at the root of our impostorism. We're going to connect to a version of ourselves for whom imposter syndrome just isn't an issue and see what we can learn. And we're going to dial in some self-affirming behaviours to help embed this new way of being. So let's get into it. And first, the work is to detach from our limiting beliefs. Because right now, you're believing something about yourself that makes this an issue for you when it isn't for others, and that makes this an issue for you now when it isn't an issue at other times. Maybe it's, I don't know enough, I haven't worked hard enough, don't have the expertise or the experience, I haven't earned this, I don't belong here. So I want you to ask yourself, what am I believing that makes me feel like an imposter? And what needs are being met by those limiting beliefs? Get your thoughts down on paper. No story, no emotional charge, just get the list. What am I believing and what needs are being met? And perhaps you want to pause the video and do that now. Now, this is about more than just raising awareness. It's about taking personal responsibility. Our imposter syndrome may be rooted in some trauma event in our past, or we may have convinced ourselves that the issue comes from other people, or it may be hardwired as a learned pattern of thinking. But these thoughts come from us, and they come from us in this moment. So I want you to really challenge yourself here and ask, am I willing to let go of these limiting beliefs? Am I willing to believe that I belong? Am I willing to find new and more purposeful ways to meet those needs or to make them irrelevant? And now I want you to stretch yourself even further and consider, who would I be without these beliefs? What becomes possible without these self-imposed limitations? And am I willing to lean into that version of myself and do what becomes possible? Now, it will sound like a no-brainer to our logical, conscious mind, but emotionally, non-consciously, it's not a given. There's a part of us that doesn't want to, that wants to hold on to these beliefs and keep our sense of imposter syndrome. So please do this work and ask yourself, am I willing to let go of these beliefs and lean into a new version of self? Now, secondly, the work is to connect to that higher version of self, that version of self for whom imposter syndrome just isn't an issue. And although this might sound like what we're always trying to do in tackling this challenge, there's a huge difference between being someone who feels like an imposter and is trying to be someone different versus being that version of yourself right now, today. Because it sidesteps the sense of lack and separation from where we are and where we want to be. So I want to invite you to imagine a version of yourself for whom imposter syndrome isn't a problem, which is actually the you at all other times. That version of self who shows up with confidence and composure. That version of self who speaks with competence and conviction. That version of self who elegantly manages the relationships around the table and gracefully handles every circumstance that arises. So bring that version of yourself to your mind's eye now. What do you notice about the inner dialogues you're running? What do you notice about your sense of self-belief, if that's even in your mind? What do you notice about where you choose to place your focus? Now, what learning do you want to take from this version of self? And what advice does this version of self have for the you who struggles with impostorism? Because you have access to that version of self whenever you choose. It's never more than a thought away. So let's bank that learning. And that takes us neatly to our final piece of work, dialing in the self-affirming behaviours that will embed this new way of being. And this is not about creating lists of achievements. We know that doesn't work for a challenge of this depth. This is about habits and behaviours in the moment that, first of all, leaves no capacity for imposter syndrome because the focus is elsewhere where it should be. And secondly, it self-signals your identity as someone who isn't hampered by impostorism. And I'm going to suggest 3 such habits and behaviours that I've seen be incredibly helpful, but please do add to this list from what you noticed and learned from that higher version of self that we connected with a moment ago. And the first is to turn your focus to the mission, the impact, and to being of service. What I notice when I struggle with impostorism is an over-exaggerated sense of self. The focus is all on me. And you might notice that when you struggle with imposter syndrome, your focus is on you. We want to get the spotlight off of you and onto the bigger picture and those whom you serve. So make it your habit to keep coming back to the mission and its goals and to the customers, clients, and stakeholders whom it serves. That's where to place your focus. The second habit is to get way more intentional about your key relationships. Our sense of impostorism has everything to do with our relationship to others, whether we belong to the group, what we imagine others think of us, comparing ourselves to our peers. Now, instead of spending energy in these destructive thought loops, spend that energy getting to know your leadership, colleagues, and stakeholders. Forge strong relationships based on mutual trust and values alignment. Practice not just speaking to, but being with these people and acclimatise to being part of the group and being comfortable with that sense of belonging. And don't wait for the big performance moments to do this. Make it a regular practice to be always connecting and relating. And finally, our third habit is to do great work that consolidates your place in the group. Now take care with this one. This isn't about doing more work. That just plays into the unhelpful belief I'm not doing enough, and we don't want any part of that. And this isn't about stressing about the quality of your work. That just plays into the unhelpful belief that this isn't good enough, and we don't want any part of that either. So you're doing enough, and the quality is great. This is about putting your energy and focus into your contribution to the group, because imposter syndrome doesn't let us off the hook for delivering meaningful value add. Now, you've earned your place in this group and you belong, else you wouldn't be here. But hold those positive beliefs alongside your commitment to be a value add to the group. Get thoughtful and strategic about what you bring to the group and get to work on it, because that's where to channel your energy. And when you do, it'll be nigh on impossible to spare a thought or a feeling for being an imposter. So 3 pieces of work for you to commit to. Get the spotlight off of you and turn your focus to the mission, impact, and service. Drop the unhelpful thoughts about others and get intentional forging those strong relationships. And do great work that is a true value add to the group. I hope you found this useful, and if you have, I'd love you to share it with someone in your world who you think needs to hear some of these ideas. And I'd love you to drop a comment sharing your favourite insight. It'll be of such benefit to everyone else who watches this.